The difference between executory and executed contracts is a fundamental concept on the national portion of the real estate exam. To master this topic, you must look at the timeline of a real estate transaction from the moment an offer is accepted to the moment the deed is recorded. An executory contract is one where the parties have reached an agreement and signed the documents, but certain promises or obligations remain unfulfilled. Think of the period between the signing of a sales contract and the actual closing date. During this window, the contract is in an executory state. Both the buyer and the seller have committed to the deal, but the buyer has not yet paid the full purchase price, and the seller has not yet delivered the deed. On the exam, you will often see questions asking about the status of a contract while it is under a financing or inspection contingency. In these scenarios, the contract is always executory because the final performance has not occurred. A common trap is for the test to ask about equitable title. During the executory phase of a sales contract, the buyer holds what is known as equitable title, which gives them a financial interest in the property and the right to eventually receive legal title. The seller retains legal title until the contract transitions from executory to executed. An executed contract, on the other hand, is a contract where every single obligation has been completely fulfilled. In the context of a home sale, this happens at the closing table, after the funds have been transferred and the deed has been handed over to the buyer. At this point, there are no more promises left to keep, and the contract is considered executed. You must be extremely careful with the word execute because the exam uses it in two different ways. To execute a document simply means to sign it. However, an executed contract means the deal is finished. If an exam question says the parties have executed the contract, they mean the transaction is complete and over. If the question says the parties are executing the documents, it usually means they are in the process of signing them. To help you remember this distinction, think of the word executory as being like a story. The word executory ends in the same sound as story, and stories are ongoing events that are still being written. An executory contract is a story in progress. Once you reach the end of the story and the book is closed, the contract is executed or done. Remember that executed ends in the letter D, which stands for done. Another area where this concept is tested involves leases. A lease is considered an executory contract for its entire duration. This is a classic trick question because students often think that once the tenant moves in, the contract is executed. That is incorrect because the tenant still has a promise to pay rent every month, and the landlord has a promise to provide a habitable space. The contract only becomes executed once the lease term ends and the tenant moves out. When you see a question asking for the status of a contract, always ask yourself if there is still something left to do. If the seller still needs to provide a clear title, or if the buyer still needs to secure a loan, the contract is executory. If the question describes a situation where the deed has been delivered and the money has been paid, the contract is executed. Focus on the word performance. If performance is still pending, you are looking at an executory situation. If performance is complete, the contract has been fully executed. Understanding this timeline is the key to avoiding the terminology traps that the national exam uses to confuse candidates who only have a surface-level understanding of contract law.